All right. Thanks, Ken, for that introduction. I'm not sure much was true, but I will do my best. We'll try. So, I definitely have enjoyed working with you all in terms of supporting you with federal grants. It is quite complex. And so, we have some new information to share with you today, too, as well as some refresher information for those that have participated in other things before. Just to give you a lay of the land, what exactly does our division oversee? And so I wanted to share that with you. Anything that has grants likely is going to be us. And a few other things as well also can help connect you, as Ken said, with other divisions if I'm not the right place. Federal funding under ESSA, Titles 1, 2, 3, 4, as well as some other grants like our charter school funding, rural low income, 21st century, and so on, as well as our English learners, our migrant programs. McKinney-Vento is now in our division. We also have a title of ombudsman in our division, which is supporting the non-public schools and LEAs with equitable services. That is now housed with us. We have a new data coach position, and then bilingual support, because the department has families that also contact us too, as well as sending out information in Spanish. So we're proud to have these different areas that work with us. So the first thing that I wanted to briefly talk about, and this will lead into our IntelliGrants information that we'll share here, is that the design that we're doing with the new system is trying to very much make a siloed, separated, sort of disconnected system make sense as we move it into online, because we don't want to take a silo connected paper system and make a silo disconnected online system. And so those of you that are familiar with IntelliGrants in other areas, even though it's the same bones, it might look quite a bit differently. So how many of you work with several different federal grants, like you oversee or apply for lots of them? Do any of you ever feel like, gosh, I feel like I just answered that question 5 times separately? Do any of you ever feel that way? Am I wrong? I can't see your smiling faces because these lights are extremely bright, but I think that you said yes. One thing that we're trying to do is make it easier where, how can we ask a question once that satisfies lots of federal grants and put it in one place? You answer it once, and then it's easier for you to demonstrate a connected plan. So as we're working on that design, we have a federal advisory board. Some of you that are in this room are on that board, so that as we're working on the structure of that, we want to make sure that it works for you and not just for me. So some big picture basics, because all of these different funding streams have different deadlines, different encumbrance dates, different allowability, who can apply for it, and so on. One thing that we've created is this side-by-side. It's a color-coded chart with all of the federal funding streams under ESSA in one place, so that if you just want a 10,000-foot view, that side-by-side you can click on and see, well, what is this money? Who's it for? Am I eligible? Why haven't I applied for this in the past? How much is it generally? That kind of information. So I wanted to share that link directly with you as we move forward. Dr. Keller earlier today said we are piloting IntelliGrants for the first time, and that is true. The grant is in my division. Your state EL funding is going to be live in the new system as a pilot in a few weeks in July. We are going to support your EL directors in being able to apply for that money, and I'll share information about that later. So, in terms of some basics, because we are under a new federal law the past couple of years, we're talking about restructuring how the system looks. I want to make sure that if you haven't had a time to reevaluate maybe what you're doing at the local level, maybe you've used Title I in the same way for 20 years, you may not know some of the flexibilities that exist for you. So I wanted to spend some time talking about that today. So many of you know reading and math is okay with Title I. We want to support those areas. We know it's been an intervention type, remediation type grant. We know we can use it on supporting instruction. We've typically used it at the elementary level, but it actually has quite a bit more flexibility. If you start with the question of how can we improve student performance, If you start with that question, there's a great likelihood that Title I, as well as the other titles, can support it. So it can actually support STEM, things that are enrichment. A lot of times attendance is poor because of engagement levels at school, and so you can focus on enrichment opportunities in a mix. Accelerated learning, especially if you're at the high school level. If you want to increase dual credit AP, IB offerings, Title can support that. We know kids struggle in school not just because of the teaching and learning, but because of other things related to student conditions. And so it can be used for counselors, social workers, and so on. Last thing I wanted to mention, high school, middle school, preschool is an option. Many of you are getting into the foray of preschool. Because of changes with supplement not supplant under Title I, it would be perfectly fine for you to pay for a few slots of preschool alongside parent pay, alongside On My Way pre-K vouchers, alongside special ed preschool, and so on. And you don't have to think about, gosh, I don't have enough money for a whole class. You might have enough money for a couple students, especially if you have some funding left over. So I wanted to point that out. In terms of the other titles, we typically know Title II is a PD grant. Some of you use it for class size reduction. PD is only effective if we can hold on to the people that we're investing in. And so we've had some districts that have shifted some of their dollars to financial incentives to recruit and retain those teachers. So that is an option. One of the other things that we've seen is strong and robust mentoring and induction programs. We've been working with Dr. Mellon and his team in Ed Effectiveness. We have a new mentoring and induction toolkit that has been piloted with Kokomo schools as well as other schools that are using it. And so creating those kinds of opportunities with that funding stream is optional as well. Title III, we have funding for EL program. We'll talk about that too. How many of you got an email yesterday that said, hey, you've got some Title IV money? All right. I was like, I really want to get that email out because usually it lightens the mood if I can start out with, hey, you have some more money, right? So you got that money yesterday. That money is very, very flexible. Same thing. If it improves students and teachers' performance, you're going to make it hard for us to say no. So it has 3 bucket areas: well-rounded, SEL, and technology and integration. So I wanted to mention this briefly. If you are struggling with carrying out a program and you wish you had more money in Title I, you wish you had more money in Title IV, or Title II, and so on. This is an anomaly that many people don't know. Title II and Title IV can be transferred in whole or in part to any other federal grant under ESSA. So if you need to move 10 grand of it to Title I so that you have enough funding to be able to put that last teacher in place, do so. If you want more SEL supports, and you need to move some Title II to Title IV, do so. That is perfectly fine. So this year's iteration of the grants, we've tried to make that more clear, and the same specialist that's supporting you with many of these grants can help you with that process if you want someone to talk you through it. So one thing in the past year that we have released quite a bit of information about is the Title I methodology. Those of you that are CFOs in your district as well, or your CFO is here, have heard about this quite a bit. But basically, supplement not supplant under Title I has changed substantially. I think the rules have kept us from doing a lot of what we want to do because of fear of using the money incorrectly. And so with ESSA, it changed this greatly, where basically, as long as you show that you're equitably funding your Title I schools when compared to non-Title I schools, then some of the rules have become more lax, where you don't have to worry about, well, did I do this last year with other monies? Or I'm doing this in other non-Title I schools, I can't do the exact same thing in my Title I schools. For Title I, the rules have changed, where as long as you show the funding is equitable, then you can use the money on things that make a difference for kids and teachers. Now, because the federal government likes to make things fun, do you agree? Yeah? They did not change the rules for Titles II, III, and IV. So your old hat of, I can't do that, that's supplanting, keep that hat on for Titles II, III, IV. So one thing, 2.5 years after the federal government enacted this new rule, they gave some guidance for the first time. We try to move a little bit faster than 2.5 years, but at least we're thankful for their new guidance. So one thing that we have released within the last month or so is some of you are exempt from having to write a methodology. If you have all Title I schools in your district, you're exempt. If you have just one school, not one physical building, one legal configured building, like a charter school, or you might only have one K through 12 school legally, then you're exempt. Or if you only have one school in each grade span, so one elementary, one middle, one high, you're exempt. If you have combinations of those kinds of things, like I have 3 elementaries that are Title I, 1 middle, 1 high, you still have to have a methodology. But many of you are going to be exempt with these new ones, and your specialists are going to be able to help you with that. So does anyone know, this is a pop quiz, does anyone know what drives your title funding? Does anyone know? The census. Excellent. Did the screen help you, Robin? It did. All right. That was a visual aid for us. In 2020, in April, the census is going to be conducted. I actually got a card in the mail yesterday, and I was going to bring it because I was thinking, oh gosh, this is extra information. I'll share it. But it was asking if I wanted to be a census worker, not about the census taking. So if any of you are interested in a $14 an hour part-time job on the evenings and weekends, I can help you with that too. But census, big picture, Indiana gets about $18 billion annually based upon numbers from this census. The Supreme Court is supposed to vote or rule on the citizenship question this month, is what we're told. But basically, big picture, why does this matter to schools? Schools, our federal funding is driven by the census, and so when we undercount our kids in our state, we lose a lot of money. And so we're going to be working, the Department of Ed is going to be working with the School Boards Association, which have been great partners in this, as well as several other organizations, to be able to support schools being able to share information with families. If you want to talk about the fiscal impact, every family or every person that's not counted costs us about $1,000 every year in federal funding that flows into Indiana. You multiply that times 10, that's 10 grand for every person that's not counted. And so schools have a big, people trust our schools. When you hear something from your principal, families trust it. And so we recognize that we have a big stake in this and the amount of money we get, and also being able to connect families with the right information. So be on the lookout for information from us over the next few months that's going to support you with easy information to share. Another pop quiz. In federal programs, we have a lot of parent notices. Does anyone know how many times you might have to notify a parent because you get federal money? Any guess? 7? Is that what I heard? I used to be an EL teacher, so I can wait quite a long time for you to think of your answer. It's actually 107 times that if you had all federal funding streams under ESSA and you had all the conditions that applied, like for example, 4 weeks of a teacher that actually wasn't a teacher, that was, had no license. There's 107 different times. No one can keep track of that. So what the department did was we contracted with Transact, which is a company that you sign in and they say, do you have this grant? Yes or no. Is this school Title I? Yes or no? Do you have Title II? Yes or no? And it goes all the way through the federal funding streams. And then it prints out a spreadsheet that says, here are the notices that because of your specific scenario, what do you need to do? It also provides the language the parent notices in 5 other languages so that you can just spit it out and send it to your families that don't speak English. And so we've used this to be able to support you in administering all those forms. Ms. Whitman earlier today shared some information about CSI and TSI, so I'll go through this a little bit faster. Comprehensive support and improvement, basically those are our schools who are Title I and receive an accountability grade of F, or they had a high school that graduated fewer than 2/3 of their kids. Those schools have received a planning grant, and very soon, within about 2 weeks, you're going to get a notice of the opportunity to apply for implementation funding. Targeted support and improvement is for the student groups who, if you isolate that student group, they're performing similarly to the CSI schools. So you may have an A school that's TSI because overall the school is an A, but your special ed subgroup or your black subgroup or your free and reduced or EL and so on are performing similarly to a Title I F school. And so we have those two different categories. So what are we going to do next? Ms. Whitman shared this information. Because of how much money is left over for the non-state board turnaround academies, about 44% of the money is left. And so of the notices, we're going to be sharing that with you so that you can have information about how to apply for those dollars. Unfortunately, it's going to be competitive for most of you because of how much money is remaining. Now, our TSI schools, you may have not heard a whole lot of information. Hopefully, the past 2 weeks ago, you got another notice about offering support to you as a LEA superintendent of TSI schools. And so we're going to be releasing additional support. We're working with IUPUI and their Equity Center to be able to support you further with these 4 things in terms of digging into the data to see where is it that has possible equity issues and resource allocation for our different subgroups, in helping supports and changes to curriculum and instructional frameworks, and then working with families of color, especially if the participation rate is rather low. There are some things that research supports that we can do differently to improve that participation rate, to be able to have them support their students, that then in turn helps them improve their performance at school. So watch out for those here soon. So the last little bit of information that I want to talk about briefly, and then after today, you'll have the survey to complete. I'll be at the table outside to be able to support you in any of these things or anything else that you would like to discuss. One thing that we're going to emphasize this upcoming school year is the licensure status of the teachers that are providing EL services to your EL students. So in short, the Department of Justice, Office of Civil Rights says this quote. If you wanted to reframe it, it says if you require licenses for other types of teachers, your 4th grade teacher, your high school science teacher, you must so require it for your teachers of your English learners, your EL teachers. In looking at our data, almost half of our EL teachers in our state are concentrated in just 15 LEAs. And only about half of our school districts even have a licensed EL teacher, even though about 100% of you have ELs. So what is something that we can do to change that, to support you? So we're going to be releasing some new guidance that is clarifying these federal requirements. But basically, all kids, whether they're a student with disability, an EL, a 4th grade child, are entitled to receive instruction from a teacher who's qualified. So same thing for our EL students. What we're going to do, which is what some other states have done, is we can't flip the switch for the 50% of you that don't have licensed EL teachers today, or might have only one and you have hundreds of EL teachers under their caseload. Nationally, and when Office of Civil Rights does their audits, oftentimes you find a ratio of 30 EL students to 1 EL teacher, and we know we're also not there either. So what is it that we're going to do about it? So in August, we have our EL director meeting. We're going to talk about this more in depth with you there or with your EL directors. But clarifying these licensure requirements will help us with universities making sure that new teachers are coming out with those licenses rather than just a certification or other type of training. But also we know that we have a lot of staff members that have worked with ELs for a long time, and many of them are not interested in going back to school, especially if they're in their last 5 years of teaching or so on. Plus it's expensive. So the department is going to pay for some training that basically is an alternate pathway to be able to help us bridge that gap in the next few years to get us to where every child has that opportunity to have instruction from an EL teacher of record. Last 2 slides, and then I'll turn it over to Robin. One thing this year that has come up with us that I want to clarify is WIDA participation. So many of you are familiar with the 95% participation requirement for iStep or iLearn or other types of state assessments. With WIDA, it's actually 100% because every single child who is an EL annually must participate in the assessment, because hopefully they'll work towards exiting and then we don't have to test them anymore. It also is how we drive some of your state funding from your complexity index depends upon this data. And all of your federal funding, Title I, Title III, those 2 grants specifically depend upon this data too. So we had a handful of districts this year who did not turn in large numbers of assessments. And we've had to work with those districts individually as well as with WIDA to address that. So we're going to clarify this again with those CTCs as well as school testing coordinators, WIDA testing coordinators, that it's not as simple as, I forgot to turn this in, can I turn it in a few weeks late? Because it impacts all these domino effects, including A to F accountability. So this is something we'll have as a point of contention, and it does dictate eligibility for things like Title I funding. All right. Okay. All right. Very soon, you're also going to get information about McKinney-Vento grants. We have restructured this some to encourage a cooperative kind of structure amongst several different LEAs because we know our homeless children are mobile, and so having the funding only in isolated pockets sometimes doesn't provide the best of resources. So that is going to come out no later than July, if that's something that you have been interested in. State statute was updated this year too that required additional training. For liaisons, you're familiar with the training we offer. We're also going to allow you that if you've already done the training, all you have to do is something after you've completed that training rather than the kickstand training every single year. So for example, attending TitleCon, going to a homeless session. State law codified another requirement that the homeless liaison train the teachers and educators that work with your homeless children. And if you look at the law, it basically is everyone in the district, in essence. And so for our liaisons to be able to do that, a back-to-school teacher event, a PD event during the year, we're going to be creating some slide decks to be able to support the liaisons carrying out that training. And lastly, we'll have questions through the survey and at the table later today. So I am going to turn it over to Robin LeClaire. She is our Director of School Improvement. She has a vast experience, a teacher, assistant principal, and principal, and is a good partner with me at the Department of Ed. So if you can welcome me in joining Robin.